Hello everyone, I'm Ryan Lang, also known as the Mind Player.
And I'm Tim, and together we make up part of Twilight Enigma.
So today we wanted to talk a little bit about how do you make compelling villains in your D&D campaigns? How do you take them up a notch to be something a little bit better than just your run-of-the-mill, oh, I threw something together at the last minute because the party needs to fight someone.
Mm-hmm.
So we came up with 5 tips that we think would be very good, and we'll start with them. So the first tip is give your villain a proper backstory and motivation. Your villains need to be built within your campaign. If you are building your world and then just injecting a villain into it, it can work. But if you foundationally build the villain into your campaign, then they are intrinsically connected with it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's a very important thing to think about while you're building a world for your campaign, that the villains should be there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you can establish the extent of their reach. You know, how much can they influence in this campaign? Mm-hmm. Or what do I need to change in my story so that the villain has more pull?
Yeah, another point I would say would be just like be prepared to embody your villain. You know, as part of giving it a proper backstory and motivation, you're giving yourself fuel so that you can embody that villain properly when the time comes, right? So you can spend time planning details, develop a character, so you can ensure you stay true to that character's motivation when you actually are pretending to be said character. Mm-hmm. And something I like to do when I'm trying to embody a villain or an NPC is, do like, sometimes I do a voice. You know, not everyone has to do a voice. You can make a face while you're doing it. Maybe you like change your posture in a way.
Yeah.
But finding something to kind of like get you in the headspace of the villains especially, super important. So like maybe a phrase, maybe just like the voice or those other things I said. Those can help you embody that right away. And the other thing I would say about making sure they have a proper backstory motivation is keeping a villain consistent. Mm-hmm. Consistency is key. Your villain should always act according to whatever their motivation is. And like even if they do act inconsistently, if they're a chaotic being, they should do that in a consistent manner.
Yeah.
Right? If you do anything that is untrue to your villain, the players are going to pick up on it, and it may cause problems with the way they interact with that villain or the way they see them. You know, they might not see them as quite as much of a threat anymore. They might think they're kind of silly because they like don't even have the proper motivation, or that they're just, I don't know, not behaving in a manner in keeping with your vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, some examples with that is when we did our online web series, Akratox, the villain. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got into that hunch. Like, speaking in Amarava.
Exactly.
Yes, but then there was Frogast, who was a contrast to him, which is funny because they're kind of fire and ice difference. When he was very refined, and even when he was angry, it wasn't like chaotic outbursts. It was a cold, calm, quiet.
Totally.
Yeah. So the second thing we would like to talk about is to give your players a reason to care about your villains. Because if you've ever had a villain that shows up and your players are like, cool, let's go rob that tavern.
Yeah.
You know, then it's
totally.
like, well,
completely ignore it. Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, the first thing you need to realize is your players don't need to care about the villain right away, right? You can use moments throughout your campaign to kind of amp up their care for him. So maybe your players like to just what I mentioned is rob things, make money, and get drunk in tavern all the time. Well, give them a friend who helps them get money and likes to do that with them, and they build this camaraderie with him. Then have your villain kill that person. Now they care, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always a good move. Another one I would say for getting players to care is directly involve them with the world building to an extent, whether that's in a session 0 or as you're playing the campaign and things from their backstory start developing. You know, sometimes we have those players that don't necessarily have the most fleshed out backstory from the get-go, but as they play, they start to have ideas and they'll talk to you about them. So allow your players to help develop your world is what I would say. If you can help them feel a sense of ownership over certain parts of your world, then as that villain starts to affect them, they will care. You know, because they'll feel like, oh, that was, you know, the town where my character grew up and he has friends and family there, and the villain just did something terrible to it. Now I actually kind of care because that's, you know.
I like that actually, because if your players actually help you develop a part of the world,
Totally.
they now have a personal investment in that. And I'm not talking them as the character, but them personally as the player.
Yeah.
And now you're messing it up with the villain.
Yeah, like
right?
if you have some tiny village that you threw on the map of your world and you didn't put too much thought in it, and a player suddenly is like, I want to be from there. You're like, perfect. What do you want this place to be like? Like, you know, have at it, you know, within reason. Let's work together and build this up a little bit. And I think that's a great way.
And then the villain burns it down.
Yeah, killing the NPCs, burning the characters' homes. You know, we're giving you great stuff.
Okay, so the third is weave multiple interactions with the villain into the story, right? A good villain is going to show up more than once. There is room for you to have the ultimate villain that they only meet at the end, but I'd say generally a villain should kind of grow with the party. As the party becomes more competent, the villain should become more evil, more intense. Maybe they already are huge and big, but the party isn't able to see the complete reach of what they've got their fingers into at this point. And then as the characters continue to interact with them and find out, oh, he's causing problems here, oh, and he's doing this, and oh, he's like undermining the king, and oh, you know, he rules this other kingdom, that gives them more chances to care. It also gives them more chances to understand your villain and come to know him better, or her.
Yeah, for sure. And as you're planning encounters in your campaign and trying to get, you know, a little bit more screen time, if I use the term, with the villain, just make sure that these encounters, have a purpose. So there's something that I like to use when I'm planning encounters or just campaigns. I call it the purpose test. So if there's no purpose to what you're planning, it doesn't really have a place at the table. You should spend a little bit more time making sure that there's a purpose or intent behind this encounter that you're planning. Which is why, you know, personally, this might be a hot take. Some of you might get mad. Those you know, random encounter rolling tables. It's rare that I actually roll for an encounter because I like to look through those options, and then depending where we're at that point in the game, I tailor it a little bit more. I don't always do that. We do sometimes use the random encounters, but I feel like you can use the same thing anytime there's an encounter. So, you know, if you're wanting to make an impact with your villain, instead of just saying, okay, the villain needs to pop out for a second, let's just throw down a random encounter where he's going to fight them. He'll almost kill somebody and then he'll disappear. Like, you can do better than that. Like, give it a little bit of intent, you know, something that's like a purpose that enhances either the plot of the story or the tone, and then you'll have a little bit of a better time. I think you can find a way to make the players care a little bit more through those interactions, make them meaningful.
So number 4, every villain needs unique flair. You need to get your players asking questions, right? They need to be interested in the villain. There needs to be something that makes them memorable, right? If it's just random bad guy with a sword, as a player, it's hard to relate to that. But if it's, okay, random bad guy with a very unique sword that has a special jewel in it that's encrusted with the name of a specific family. Oh, well, who's the family? Where'd the sword come from? Is it magical, right? It gets your players asking questions. Spoiler alert if you haven't watched our web series, but with one of our villains, when the players first met him, they didn't know he was a villain, but he had an eye that was a different color. And it was the color of a very unique and specific thing in the campaign, which got the players to start asking a lot of questions about this guy. And in asking those questions, it led them to start asking questions that made them think, oh, maybe he's not telling us the whole truth. And eventually it got to the point where they realized, there's more going on with this character than meets the eye. Oh, pun not intended.
Oh, no.
And they discovered his true intentions eventually. So yeah, give them a reason to ask questions and to remember your villain.
Yeah, and as you're thinking about your unique flair that you've given this villain, I would just say try to demonstrate rather than describe, which would be sort of the D&D equivalent of show don't tell, because in D&D we have to tell, because that's kind of the part of the game.
Yep.
So demonstrate rather than describe. Villains can have flair in lots of different ways, so consider how you can demonstrate that flair in a way. Like going back to an example from our campaign, when we first met one of these villains, or first heard about him, we hadn't actually met him yet. We ran into a group of people, and one of them had actually been touched by this villain, and we got to see the effect that had on him. We tried to help him, but he didn't
make it.
He didn't survive. So we immediately knew that even just a touch from this guy was enough to cause death. And we were very high level at the time, so that was pretty frightening to us. And that's a perfect way to demonstrate. We were kind of dealing with a new NPC that we were interested in getting to know, and then we were finding out about what their experience was, and we were able to see the effects of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now our last point, and this is kind of I call this our special point here, is every campaign needs multiple villains, right? And there's good reasons for this. This kind of calls back to number 1 about giving your villains proper backstory and motivation, building them with the campaign. If you can build multiple villains into the world, you now have a world that feels more fleshed out, more realistic, and whichever one your players decide to lock into, you can be like, okay, I'm going to add more to this guy, and he's going to become the villain of the campaign. You give yourself more opportunities for success as a DM.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess this last piece of advice to go along with creating multiple villains, kind of just good D&D advice in general. It applies to our multiple villains, but just D&D in general, and that's hold nothing sacred. Mm-hmm. I once heard D&D described as, or as DMing, described as you presenting your players with a box to open, but what your players don't know is that as they're opening the box, you're shoving more stuff in from underneath.
Yeah.
Which is exactly how it is, right? Sometimes we hide things as DMs and pretend, yeah, that was the way it was all along, but really it wasn't. So you can always change things.
Yep.
If your vision for the big bad really isn't connecting with the players, and they've latched onto another one of these other villains that you've made because you followed our advice and made multiple villains, then make that one have a bigger role. Mm-hmm. Let that villain do something drastic that the players are going to be like, oh no, we're really going after this guy now, mm-hmm. because of what just happened. Elements in D&D only really become real when they hit the table. So you're always at your liberty to sort of adjust and go with the flow and make things work when they're not. Mm-hmm. So.
And if you create a bunch of villains and you feel like it's overstuffed, you can just have some of those villains fall away to the wayside or not end up using some of them as well.
Right. Like I said, it's not real unless it hits the table. So if it doesn't come up, the players will never know that you mm-hmm. spent so many hours planning it.
Yeah.
But that's the art of DMing, unfortunately.
All right. Yeah. So there you have. That's Twilight Enigma's 5 tips for compelling D&D villains. If you like what we're doing, we post every Tuesday, and give us a like, a comment, a subscription. And yeah,
if you guys have any questions or want any further advice or have an interesting dilemma you're dealing with at your own table right now, feel free to throw it in the comments. We'd love mm-hmm. to chat with you about it, and we love getting in there and answering questions and trying to help. So
tell us about some of your villains and things that have worked.
Please.
That way other people, as they read, they can go, oh, hey, that's a good idea, because I don't profess to have all the best ideas.
No, and like most DMs, me personally, a lot of my ideas are just a conglomeration of all the media that I've consumed.
Exactly.
Books, movies, TV, whatever else. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
But anyways, again, thanks guys for watching. We do also have a Patreon available. Details will be in the description. And if you want to check out our web show, Adventures in the Parted Veil, all the episodes are up now. We finished it a little while ago, and it was really fun. So please check it out.
Yeah, and we'll see ya.
See you next time.
Thank you.